right, you admirable, but ultimately damnable, accursed. Welcome to the Curse of Politics, your one-stop political shop for 100% of the strategies and 70% of the swears. David Herle here, and with me our political panel, back to full strength this week. Jordan Leichnitz is here, thank Christ. Whoa. Scott Reid is here, and Kory Teneycke is here. Guys, before we begin, I got to throw out a listener comment from Apple Podcasts from IIYIPYG.
I know him.
Who writes, yeah, he's a close friend.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A fun and fantastical clash of views every week with enough backroom curtain peeking to ground the analysis in the sense that these folks have seen how things really work. Plus, I had to go back and listen to Scott Reid's Mulroney impression 3 times. Outstanding work all around. Scott, how would Brian Mulroney thank our friend IIYIPYG?
Well, I am reminded that your reference to me recalls the admiration of many Canadians who watched my time in office with amazement that a government had the courage to take on the great challenges of the day, to set forth upon the horizons and place into our national architecture the standards and the foundations that would generate prosperity for a million. So I thank you, II, and the rest of your strange name, and I wish you the very, very best.
All right, here's the rundown this week. It's all Liberals all the time, really. We'll dive into the caucus meeting, the housing and other initiatives announced there, and what the opposition responses were. Our cursed clipping stays with the theme. That's Shannon Proudfoot's deep dive in the Globe on the seemingly everlasting bond between Prime Minister Trudeau and his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford. And then it's the great Gordon Pinsent, the harbinger of our Hey Yous. Kory, Jordan, and Scott, it is great to have you all back. How are you today?
Doing great.
So good. So good.
Good
to have you back, Jordan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just like Slim Shady. She's back. Look who's back.
Right. I was in BC last week, and guys, it was so refreshing. No one gives a shit about federal politics out there. It's beautiful. There's oceans, there's whales, and the Rockies. Like nothing passes. It was so wonderful. Would recommend.
You know, the polls tell us that they're paying a little bit of attention to federal politics, and not to the advantage of either the fucking NDP or the Liberals. There's some minds changing out there, so there must be some people paying some attention.
It's okay.
A lot of reasonable
the enduring
people
love
out
for
there.
the EB government is enough to give me consolation. So.
Yeah, although they had a little noise the last couple of days.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. All right. So let's.
Hey, wait! Before we leave EB, I just want to make this drive by sort of slam and get Jordan's uncomfortable reaction. Everyone says he's a complete asshole. Is that true?
Oh, I don't know. I've never worked with him personally, but I would say that's not at all a disqualifying quality for office, clearly. So
I hear you. I just like people, every time I talk to a friend who's a New Democrat and his name comes up, they go,
Well, like there's a little bit of a populist bent in it. I mean, I'll just make this passing comment. Like when the Conservatives have done best in British Columbia at the federal level, or conservative parties, is the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance. Like it was Preston Manning in 93, and then went down a little bit in 97. But the high watermark for Conservatives, I believe, was Stockwell Day under the Canadian Alliance, which is
you were speaking about reasonable people in British Columbia.
Yeah, well, they're coming to the right conclusion. Anyway.
Yeah, and I would say also,
I can see, when you look at Poilievre, I can see why he is doing better there. He is closer, I think, to that framing and that sort of sensibility. But I think for Horgan and EB, there are elements of that kind of populism in them as well. And so I'm not shocked. I think it's not that. BC has changed in any way here. I think it's that there are people who are providing a reflection of something that voters have traditionally responded well to.
You got to lay out them giant radish.
Ripping it up out there is Kevin Falcon.
There for sure. Yeah. Ooh.
Kevin Falcon ripping it up out there. The guy is going to preside over the death of that political party.
Richly deserved.
Very well could.
Yeah.
Yep.
Does that mean that the Liberals have died if they change their name before they die?
It's like a resurrection. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the comeback won't take. It'll take longer than 3 days for them to rise.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, the NDP is really firmly rolling the stone in front of that particular.
All right, you guys, it's been a pretty big week in Canadian politics at the federal level. In the last 7 days, we've had the Conservative Convention, the PM's trip to India, where Canada-India relations appear to have hit the skids, by the way. The Liberal Caucus meeting, including a bunch of announcements, a housing proposal from Poilievre, a big Canada 2020 Tony Blair fire for progressives to keep warm around, and a showdown with grocery CEOs today. Did I miss anything?
I think that's the highlights.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start by focusing in on the
new trailer for Loki 2.
Really?
Yeah. I'm kind of excited. They got to get back on track, the MCU. Anyway, that's not as relevant.
But interesting nonetheless.
Speaking of back on track.
Yeah. Let's start by focusing on the Liberal caucus. From my point of view, two things of note. First, lots of critical talk about the PM and the PMO going into the meeting, none coming out. Whatever else happened in that meeting, there was clearly some talk about people pissing inside the tent and cleansing of that attitude. They were all singing from the same hymn book at the end. The second, the announcements. 2 on housing and 1 on food prices. The meeting with the grocers is, as Kory said yesterday, and by the way, I almost wanted to go through the screen when you guys all claimed they were responding to your question period panel. The government. Of course, they're responding to the Curse of Politics panel, right? Particularly Jordan, you know?
Clearly.
Yeah. The meeting with the grocers is, as Kory said, bullshit theater, but maybe effective theater. Personally, I don't see the meeting's going to be with Champagne and Freeland, and I don't see them as convincing populists. And this is clearly a populist exercise. But the housing announcements made me curious because, first, the HST idea has been sitting around since the Liberal platform in 2015. Second, the aggressive use of the Housing Accelerator Fund by Fraser just illustrates how useless Hussein was in that role, because they could have been doing this a long time ago, but Hussein's last act was to pen an op-ed saying, don't blame the municipalities for this, and immediately we're blaming the municipalities for this. More importantly, though, one of the advantages of government is the ability to harness the bureaucracy and power to put together plans that actually make a difference and implement them. And the announcements last week didn't sound like a plan that was part of a thing that was going to solve this problem. They just sounded like announcements that were thrown out to say, get something out there and to be seen like you were getting something out there. Jordan, have I got that wrong, or did they sort of miss that?
Yeah, I would say I had the same question that you did. And the way my thought as I saw the trio of announcements was, and I've got, I think, critiques of each one individually that basically boil down to too little, too late in the game. Not that it's too late for their numbers to change, but that in the face of the problems that have really been left for so long under their mandate, I think they measure up not so great next to the challenge. But is it a floor or a ceiling in terms of their policy offer on these issues? And if this is like their best shot coming out of it to try to have sort of a full frontal attack on what Poilievre has been putting forward, I'm not sure it's going to carry them that far. I mean, the measures in and of themselves, each individually, are pretty weak. The GST off the construction, as you mentioned, this has been on the books since 2015, which immediately begs the question of why it's taken 8 years to enact it. So even if it will have even a marginal positive impact on the construction of rental housing, that's also not going to come for years down the line in terms of the availability of housing. So it doesn't really do anything to help people in the immediate, and it underscores years of inaction. So I think there's certainly some mixed messaging there that makes it not such a clean hit for them. On the groceries, I think this is probably the smartest of the bunch in terms of them actually choosing an enemy, personalizing it a little bit. Like, God, Galen Weston is just doing more for Canadian politics than almost anybody else these days. And I think it's smart to go in. This has been Singh's territory, and to not let him have that space for them to try to claim that ground is really good. But at the end of the day, it also leaves them vulnerable, because this is going to be a meeting about the inflation in food prices, and sort of they're tilting the issue towards competition, which is not necessarily going to result in anything concrete in terms of lowering grocery prices. So you've set yourself up with some high expectations for what's effectively a meeting where they're going to speak sternly to Galen Weston. So that does also leave an opening for Singh to come in, as you'll probably see him do today with his legislation, and try to drive a bit of a harder wedge. And then the last piece, I can see Kory dying to get in here, the housing announcement. So on the Housing Accelerator Fund, this is what the fund was supposed to do. And the fact that they dressed this up as unprecedented and the greatest thing since sliced bread, like, this is another example of really setting a trap for themselves to fall into on the communications front. So the expectations are sky high. I imagine that this was many months in the making, not an easy thing to pull off with the municipality. So unless they have like dozens of these in the bag ready to roll out, bam, 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 I think that the benefit is really going to be minimal. So if this is all they've got, it's not enough. What I saw coming out of the retreat, I think on the positive side, and the most important thing was, like, it's alive. There were some signs of life. There was a spark animating the group, which is, I think, more than we could say coming out of what was just an incredibly difficult summer for the Liberals, entirely self-inflicted. So that's significant. I don't read a whole lot into the grumbling before the caucus and the lack of grumbling to media after the caucus. That's pretty normal. So by all accounts, they closed the door and they actually let backbench MPs talk to the PM. That's gonna take some steam off right off the bat. That would be normal. I think the real test is obviously going to be like 2-3 months from now to see if any of these changes are lasting. But what we are still missing, and what they're still missing, is a cohesive story, a central narrative that really puts Canadian voters in the middle, in the center of that story, and makes a clear match between the problems Canadians are experiencing and what the government wants to solve. Like, you can see they're trying to put it together, but the click has not yet happened.
Kory?
Well, there's lots I want to say around this. I agree with a lot of what Jordan just said. I do think I will say the grocery store stuff probably got the biggest bang, and I think that's what you mean, Jordan, like in terms of effectiveness. But I also agree with what you were saying that, there's a spark there, but it could be Frankensteins Monster that they're waking up. How does it end differently than Singh's meeting with those grocers did? Like, does the government have an or else, or what? They have a number of or else's. Like, they could do a profit tax. They could strip profits off them, in a targeted way. But I think it leads to a bunch of secondary questions that just feed Poilievre. So if we want to look at things that are driving the price of groceries up, carbon tax, please come forward, take a bow. Like, this is something that goes directly on the bottom line of just about everything you buy, but food in particular. And I also think and maybe this is a bit uncomfortable for Poilievre and doesn't help him, but it certainly doesn't help the Liberal government. And if you were to look at, where is the big gap between prices that Canadians pay for certain food items and those that most people in the rest of the world pay, especially Americans, it comes back to supply management and paying, 4x the amount for chicken or, so if you're looking at poultry and dairy products, supply management hyperinflates the cost of those food items for regular consumers. And it's entirely.
Have you ever found a political party against supply management, Kory?
Well, it almost was going to be the Conservative Party of Canada when Max Bernier narrowly lost. Now I think it's just the PPC. Yeah. But it does, like, the criticism is still there. Like, it's not like the federal government has no power in this. I think there were smarter things for them to go on and talk about, and I'm going to roll one of them out for you right now, because I think you're seeing some pressure from the provinces on it, and I don't understand why they haven't done this, because I think it doesn't cross the line in terms of direction, but they should be calling on the Governor of the Bank of Canada to re-examine whether or not 2% is the right number in terms of baseline for inflation, and to make a public justification for why it should stay that or whether it should change. Because I think that debate is going on out there. And I think if you want to talk about things that are actually going to do something for regular middle class Canadians, around mortgages, around housing starts, a whole range of things. It's the inflation, it's the interest rates, and so I've heard a lot of smart economists. I know, you get two economists in a room, you get two totally different opinions. They can both have Nobel Prizes. So like there is a lot of room for debate around this stuff. Why is there no debate on this? Like I'm hearing a lot of debate in smart circles as to whether or not we don't have a couple of points of baked in inflation around supply chains. I think, last week there was like 58 warships circling Taiwan and like 170, fighter aircraft. And, we've got major conflict continuing in Ukraine with, millions of square kilometers that are mined and basically out of agricultural production. We've got 3 of the 4 ports that deliver food from Ukraine basically look like Berlin in 1945. So, why aren't we having a conversation around that? They could order that conversation to happen. I think it would look like they're doing something on the economy and on the right side of that issue. But it's crickets. It's crickets and inertia. I don't understand it.
Fresh data. You hurly-burlyites know there's nothing I like more than sinking my teeth into compelling new numbers. So, just in time for the fall season and pumpkin spice showing up in places pumpkin spice has no business showing up in, I present to you StatsCan's latest and greatest labor productivity measure. Some context first. For weeks, I've been talking about the hundreds of billions of dollars our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has been investing in wireless and wireline infrastructure and innovation. How it's critical to the continued growth and future success of the Canadian economy. Well, as it usually is in my world, the proof's in the data. Labor productivity is a key measure of economic success because it puts the lens on the amount of goods and services produced per unit of labor input. Decent news. StatsCan reports that over a 10-year period from 2012 to 2022, Canadian labor productivity increased 9.5% across all industries. Much better news. During the same period, labor productivity in the telecommunications industry more than doubled that growth, clocking in at 19.5%. Here's what that means. Canadian telecom companies like TELUS have been a leading driver of economic growth in this country. In fact, they've been propping it up. In TELUS's case, investing in and innovating technology that improves education and healthcare, produces a more efficient, sustainable food supply, and grows business and employment opportunity. So why on earth would we want to stymie all that good stuff? I mentioned it last time. There's the specter of an uncertain regulatory environment out there. Combined with potential policies or regulation, like mandated regimes, that put pressures on facility-based carriers like TELUS, dramatically limiting their ability to invest and drive economic growth. So something's got to give. The center, as they say, will not hold. Is it really worth taking that kind of risk with our economy? More next week. Scott, Kory raises a point that I've been thinking about, which is, and I don't, go on and say whatever you want to say about the caucus meeting and all that, but, the government has pretty limited resources right now to address some of these things. And do they want to be applying all of them to an issue like housing where they're never going to get a win out of it? Or do they need to find a way to get this issue off the headlines, but you save their powder for another issue on which they're playing offense?
Well, the problem is this isn't a chalkboard. This is real life. So they don't get to just draw the play up as they prefer it. And they're going to have to do more than one thing at one time. And they're going to have to manage the electricity that's rolling off of the housing file and appear to finally be responsive and all of that at the same time that they try to take advantage of the calendar that's available to them, apparently, thanks to the NDP, that allows them to try to procure a different set of issues upon which they'll ultimately be judged, and even try to manipulate the campaign to come into something that's a referendum on an issue as opposed to a referendum on Trudeau. Because with the referendum on Trudeau, I don't think they're going to like the fucking outcome. And I'm not pissing on the Prime Minister. I'm just saying that's the reality of these polls, and they may obviate, but they're not going to reverse. And so when I look at the caucus, I see a bunch of things, and some of which I agree with. Although I think that Jordan and Kory are both being too dismissive of some top line stuff, and So first of all, I agree with you, David. Like, it's easy to say, oh, it's no big deal, whatever. It's kind of predictable. They went in bitching, but they came out singing from the same hymn book. There's nothing inevitable about that. And there were real conditions here for a continued narrative, which coming out of Ottawa and coming out of the national, the parliamentary press gallery, if there had been people taking hard swings after caucus, that generates almost all the news stories, right? Like, and it can eclipse stuff like that pure ankle-biting bullshit politics, internal civil war sort of stuff can completely overwhelm things you actually want to talk about. So I think the road untraveled is an important victory for them, and I do give them credit for that. I really think that we shouldn't overlook, and I have my criticisms I'll come to, but I don't think we should overlook the importance after this absolute fucking disaster of a summer of them looking like they're finally doing something. They're responding. They're actually having a substantive, specific reply to something out there. And, it's kind of like, that batch of announcements, particularly obviously the GST and the grocery. I mean, it's kind of like the political equivalent of, tapping on the pipes in a stranded submarine. It's like, holy shit. Ping, ping, fuck! The government's down there. They're alive. I think they're alive. There's signs of life.
For a little while.
Jesus Christ! Maybe we can get them back to the surface. We might be able to save these people. And that's not unimportant. Because it was a pretty bleak, just riding in the dark submarine to the bottom of the goddamn San Andreas Fault kind of summer for them. So I think that's important. And I also, by the way, we can dismiss it as horseshit theater, and we can say, oh, this and that. There's no fucking way. There's no fucking way that beating up on the grocery store CEOs isn't a good idea. And there's no way that there isn't, so to speak, milk in that cow. And there's no way that they risk in any way that by raising these issues, they somehow reward. Singh, give me a break. Like, when we say, oh, well, this is Singh's issue, in whose world? Like, talk about our noses being too close to the window pane. Nobody in the real world is conscious of what Singh has had to say on this. The NDP think that they own this issue. They don't own this issue. And, I've just invited David Lewis here to come and talk to you about how completely overwhelmed and eclipsed Singh could easily get on this issue. So I think all of that's to the good. Now, what is my fundamental core criticism? And I have some. I think it comes down to PMO communications. And I'm sorry if that's unfair from the outside, not being on the inside. And I know as a comms director for the PMO that, and Sir Kory's had the exact same role. You take a lot of shit. And I hate it when people say we don't have a substance story, we have a comms problem. But when two specific things. One, that housing accelerator announcement, it was so pre-hyped, so badly preconditioned, so over preconditioned. It was ridiculous. It was that Minister Fraser is going to come forward with an announcement that is going to shatter our perceptions of the physical mechanics of the universe, that it's going to alter reality as we understand it. And it was just so frustratingly amateurish in terms of hyping that thing up, when, an understatement on it and a little backspin as opposed to forespin could have really turned that into a much more of a winner. Look, you know what? You're hearing fucking Poilievre talk about this. We've told you we've had this device. Forget what we call it. Housing accelerator, management consultant, horse shit fucking label. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Take that name out to the middle of the lake and drown it. But we're going to use the power of the federal government to actually muscle municipalities into changing the way that they zone. That's a good thing. And by the way, you could also say, well, Poilievre can bitch and moan about the fact that he's been talking about it on his own. But you know what? We've trumped him here. Okay. So that was badly done. The other thing is, and it's your point, David, and I've been harping on this for days. I'm glad that they played some cards. I'm glad they came out on the HST. I'm glad they did, but they've got to put this thing, and Jordan made the same point, they've got to put this thing into a coherent story. People will not remember specific measures, even important ones. And they got a nice story today about how home builders are saying this will make a difference and all. But they've got to create persistence, right? on this issue. They have to create a fundamental core narrative. Most importantly, they have to persuade people, we have a plan. And then once I have a plan, it doesn't have one piece, right? It has a bunch of pieces. It's not just going to affect, right, the ability of builders to economically, with some sense of financial reward, now build rental housing. But then I'm also going to deal with financing tools and instruments that allow people who are 25 years old to have the hope that they can scrap together a down payment. By the way, on the other end, I'm going to talk about how we deal with municipalities and making certain that we get have an integrated plan, have it make sense. I'm not so foolish as to believe that everyone is going to follow every element of it, but people like to know that there's coherence. And then that creates an expectation that you will, over the course of the fall and the spring, fulfill on this. And you can back into it, and you can condition the media to report on this as a continuing, persistent effort of the government. None of that was there. There was no sense of story. It was literally a seizure of announcements. It was just a throbbing, thrashing body that said, Jesus Christ, right? Here's kind of like, there's bright lights, and so we're just going to shake, and HST announcements are going to fall out of us, and some grocers are going to get punched in the head. I'm glad they did those things, but they've got to up their game in terms of making this come together. I have a lot of faith in Fraser. I don't want to raise expectations and fright the whole guy with the future of the party, but I have a lot of faith in his ability to tell that story. The PMO comms team needs to get out of the motherfucking way and permit that story to be told, allow him to put it together, and allow them as a government to provide people with some assurance that this isn't just something you do when your ass is on fire after 2 bad polls post-Labor Day.
Yeah, it's early in the day for me to hear Scott talk about throbbing body parts. But Kory, Scott does have an interesting point here, which is, where does Poilievre go now, given that the Liberal policy is effectively his policy? And they have the capacity to actually do it right now because they're in office. So, perhaps the bigger part of the Housing Accelerator Fund was not the deal with London, but the letter to Calgary. And so, given the existence of that now, what is Poilievre's opening on this issue now?
Well, I think it's to point out, I think, a lack of competence and pull on the threads of this. I could think there are a couple of obvious things. One is, if this is so smart, why didn't you do it a long time ago? This is, we're years into this housing crisis, and if you look at this Housing Accelerator Fund, yeah, it's nice to go out and announce $77 million from it, but it's a little less than 2% of the money that was committed for this, and you just haven't done anything with it. So, what do you call it when you've done, used 2% of the money and 98% hasn't been used? That's not a passing grade. It's not like that was, 52%.
It means you got lots of cards left in the deck to play, and this game ain't over for 2 years.
Well, but what else was that announcement about? It's about subsidy for rental housing, and we've talked about this before. I think rental housing, well, that might be an important policy fix. I think it misses the mark politically in terms of being a vote driver for people who are most concerned about the housing shortage that are politically important to this government. So those are the middle class folks who are in a condo building or in a rental unit, or they're renting someplace else, right? But the point is, they're renting and they want to buy, and home ownership seems like it's getting further and further away from them, not closer and closer. And so saying, oh, we're going to build a whole bunch more rental housing for you, is kind of like, well, did you hear me or not? It's a response to a question that wasn't asked. And I think this is kind of an issue. Who is that question asked by? It's asked by, people who are advocates for lower cost housing on the rental market. But those are stakeholders. Those aren't voters.
So this week is Rail Safety Week. It's a big deal for our sponsor, CN. CN's railroaders are out across the country, organizing events in the communities along its network, trying to educate people about how to coexist safely with the titanic machines that roll past their neighborhoods every day. So to help out, dear listeners, we've prepared a little quiz. I hope you find it as informative as I did. Here we go. Question: what do you do if your car stalls on railroad tracks at a crossing? Answer: don't waste time trying to get it going again. Get everyone out fast and put at least 30 meters between yourself and your vehicle to avoid flying debris. Then call the emergency number posted on signage at the crossing or call 911. Question: how many Canadians are seriously injured or killed in railway crossing or trespassing incidents every year? Answer: more than 100. And here's the thing, people. Every single incident is preventable. Railroad tracks aren't places for fun and games, and it's a really bad idea to race a locomotive. Really bad. Question: what is the likelihood that a collision between a train and a motor vehicle will result in loss of life? Answer: a driver who collides with another motor vehicle is more than 40 times more likely to survive than a motorist who collides with a train. Common sense, right? A train is a juggernaut. CN is obsessed with safety and its engineers are highly trained, but they cannot change direction to avoid someone playing chicken. Just don't. Question: where do most collisions with trains occur? Answer: within 40 kilometers of the motorist's home, and 60% of collisions happen at crossings with gates, lights, and bells. Let that sink in, folks. Question: how long does it take a train to stop? Answer: about 2 kilometers. And trains are always moving faster than they appear. Slowness is an illusion. I could go on, but you get the idea. CN is 100% committed to safety. It spends a fortune on technology and training. But nothing can take the place of common sense. Just remember, tracks are for trains and nothing else. Have a safe week. Jordan, Kory was getting at how complicated this issue is. Okay? How many parts it has. And the fact is, Freeland said yesterday, it's going to take a long time. Like, we're not going to fix this problem by 2025. Right? So I want to go back to the question I was trying to ask Scott earlier. Like, when you're thinking this through from the government's point of view, one of the things you have to think about is, like, what are our resources over the next 2 years that we have available? And, they've got a pretty big deficit. Freeland has been talking about restraint. They're going to be introducing pharmacare, apparently, right? And dental continues to roll out. They have limited fiscal firepower. And surely one of the things they have to be thinking about is how much of it are we going to dump into this housing file for no discernible impact in the electoral timeframe versus how much of it do we save for that other issue that will change the frame or change the dynamic?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question. I have to say, what I was really struck by in the housing announcement, both in the GST portion and the London announcement, is that there's still nothing in the approach that's touching on the third of Canadians who own a mortgage, who are arguably feeling, other than renters who are trying to get into the housing market, this is the second largest group of people who are feeling the most intense pain right now. And I think on that issue, it goes back to what Kory was talking about. There is an option for the government to get more involved with the Bank of Canada on interest rates in a variety of ways. And there's a lot of debate that is now coming into the mainstream about what that could look like. And, and I think Kory and I would probably differ on how we would do it. But it's interesting that, the government is somewhat surrounded on the issue right now. And the good news for them is that if they want to wade into this issue.
Haven't they been fighting Poilievre? Just a second. Haven't they been fighting Poilievre for a couple of years now on the fact that he doesn't respect the independence of the Bank of Canada? So
yeah,
now
but that's a moronic fight. That's a moronic fight, and they should drop it because nobody in Canada who's paying a mortgage cares about that. They only care that their variable rate mortgage has now gone up so much that every penny of their monthly payment is going to interest, and they've all of a sudden got a 60-year mortgage. That is the only thing people care about. And I think that it's maybe a mental bridge too far for this government to do. I'm not sure that they are going to get there. But the reality is that globally, the idea that monetary policy needs to be completely divorced from the lived reality of people is increasingly falling out of fashion. And there is a need for political buy-in for this. And there's a risk right now that we're losing that in Canada. So I do think that the good news for the government here is that if they want to wade in a responsible and measured way to do, particularly with the mandate, not about weighing in on individual rate decisions, that there's space for them to do that politically. And it doesn't cost them a penny. So this is something that they can do that touches those third of Canadians who so far are completely unanswered by their policy fixes.
Yeah, I keep coming back to this as being probably the smartest area, and also, you know, the correct area for the government to be focusing on. If we have, you know, a couple percent or 2.5% or whatever the number is, like let all the smart people get out and argue of essentially global inflation, you know, associated with supply chains and you know, disruptions due to the war in Ukraine, et cetera. Like whatever that number is, you know, you're never going to get Canadian inflation below that. Like it's so you could, you know, send the Canadian economy into a tailspin if you do this wrong for no discernible purpose. You know, you're punishing people for a crime they didn't commit, and I think it's, you know, it's something that's, the attacks are going to continue from the right. They're going to continue from the left. They're going to continue from academic sources and the commentariat out there that don't have any discernible political interest in this one way or the other. They have an interest in, you know, the sound management of the economy. I think they're going to get criticism from all sides. And, you know, I think even someone like Andrew Coyne might go so far as to say that it's appropriate for the government of Canada to set what the policy benchmarks are around inflation, and then allow the Bank of Canada to then go about rate increases and do all of that and exercise or implement their independence. But I don't think anybody is going to say that the government talking about that and saying, at least, even if you're not going to change it, come out and justify it, explain it to people, because there's a lot of people who disagree with you right now. But I think if I were them politically, I would be leaning in the same direction that Jordan and I are on this, and a lot of other people are, which is maybe it's time to rethink what that baseline inflation number is that we respond to. But you know, we'll see. But you know, it puts them squarely on the right side of homeowners, which is, you know, existing homeowners that have mortgages, which I think is another big group. And they don't think about this affordability thing in quite the same way as millennials and new Canadians do. They you know, they have something to protect as opposed to something they aspire to. And both are very poignant motivators, but a little bit different in their execution, I think.
And bonus, unlike all of the things that they're doing in rental housing, it would have an immediate impact. And this is really what's missing in their policy offer so far for the Liberals politically. There's just too long of a lag between the policy and when people are going to feel it. And they've got to close that gap some way. They're in the process of buying political time, probably at great cost from Singh over the next 1.5 to 2 years. So what are they going to do with that time? How are they going to actually get some concrete wins in people's hands in the space of that period? That's the question there.
Scott, you know,
Wow.
you got, I mean, you, between your time in finance and PMO, you've got a pretty sophisticated understanding of the relationship between the government and the Bank of Canada. I say that sincerely. I'm not, and you know, we joked about it last week, but it's no laughing matter. Pierre Trudeau watched Gerald Bouie sink his chances for re-election and didn't do anything to Bouie, didn't contradict him publicly or anything. Brian Mulroney watched John Crow sink his chances for re-election. Didn't say anything, didn't replace Crow, didn't tell him to do something different. Because that is the understanding of Canadian politics, is that the bank's independent, you let it do its job, how it sees fit, the government does not tell it what to do. And this is seen as a hugely important, inviolable principle of central banks. So how do you feel about the government getting involved with Tiff Macklem now?
Well, I'm not as convinced as these guys, and maybe you as well, that this is a fight that the government should launch. I'm not convinced that they should do it. I'm very convinced they would be bad at it, and I'm relatively convinced that it would be ineffective. I think the only thing that's going to be effective is, and we may be upon this moment naturally, a gradual easing of those interest rates. And I hear all the factors that Kory's talking about, but those are bets that he's making and assumptions he's making. My assumption is that we're just about at the end of the tightening cycle, and it would be a strange thing for them now to turn and start punching the guy in the head as economic conditions are probably going to cause them to start to maybe ease off in the new year. I don't think we're going to see a lot more increases to interest rates. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's a reasonable bet. And I guess everybody's been watching a different movie than me. But if anybody on this panel thinks that Chrystia Freeland is going to be able to execute an elegant confrontation with the Bank of Canada, then I think you're crazy. Because I watched her try to take a bit of a high elbow at the bank around the last interest rate with the prepared statement that came afterwards, and it was clumsy and it was ineffective, and it placed her immediately in between any place of logic. So she was in no man's land completely with that tactic. I just think this government would be very bad at it. I think Freeland in particular will be bad at it. I don't think she's going to be very good at the meeting you're talking about with the grocers, by the way. I think that's also a mistake. Because I just don't think she's going to want to try to explain what monetary policy is, what the boundaries of the relationship have been traditionally, how they, as a government, wish to evolve those things, that it's not about the fact that the government's ass is on fire, that they're not contradicting themselves, that these external factors have changed, and that therefore provides them with a coherent logic as to why their message in and around the Bank of Canada and the independence of monetary policy might also need to be modified. It will be a brutal fucking exercise.
You're circling the larger problem.
Time out on that though. I don't agree that that's bad for them. I think what's happening right now is they're getting outflanked on this issue by a lot of different people. Most notably, and I think it started with Poilievre, who was the first to be critical. Some people think too critical and saying fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. Maybe that is, a little too much hot sauce, but I think he's been circling in on what the right amount of flavoring on that is. And I think that so has Singh. But more importantly, I think a lot of economists and people in academia and people who watch the housing market, a lot of smart people who don't have a political horse in this race are also talking about this. And it increasingly looks like the government is less and less, is more and more detached from reality and less actually engaging on something that is a part of, a larger discussion that's going on. I think
you guys are confusing.
I don't think that having the government say on a policy basis, where the fence posts are around, the overall management of the economy, and having that be in the hands of democratically elected officials is a bad thing. I think that's actually, you could argue fundamentally good.
I go hunting in different ways. Let me just say that. Can I just? I have one small thing, David, in reply to all that. I really think that, again, this is a nose too close to the window pane issue. I think we are confusing how important it is. I think we're confusing the importance of what politicians say about interest rates with the importance of interest rates. I think the problem the government has is not what it says about the central bank. I think the problem is that interest rates are higher. And their bet has to be that if interest rates come down, some of their problems will start to ease and they will have a chance to move the yardsticks. I don't believe they'll do much by bitching about high interest rates. I don't think they're going to do a lot by attacking the central bank. I don't actually believe that's been the secret of Poilievre's success. And so I think the government, if it attempted to do it, will look craven and will be terrible at it. And it will be a complicated, messy, shittiest TED Talk in the history of TED Talk. So I'd go looking elsewhere.
But the other thing I would bear in mind is a sort of an overarching thought for the Liberals is if their objective over the next couple of years is to have Canadians conclude that Poilievre is too risky for a variety of reasons to have the job, then they need to appear to be safe hands. And so while, we've been arguing for them to be more active, etc., I would be careful about going out and picking a fight with everybody and seeming like you were constantly embroiled in external battles like that, because that doesn't give the impression of safe hands. And I
think that logic is deadly. Like the issue here is that it puts the Liberals in the position of defending the status quo that's punishing Canadians every month. They are left holding the bag, whether they want to or not. That's the end result, right?
Well, they kind of have to hope that it works out over 2 years, that rates are down and inflation is...
And that's a big gamble, right? And I think that the challenge here is that when they aren't out there setting parameters to advocate for a different way of doing things in whatever way they want to do that, be it around what the target rate is or the mandate, which, by the way, has been modified before to include employment, right? So this is not in any way unprecedented. I think the argument about saying that any interference in the Bank of Canada is somehow not safe or not competent or not safe hands is that that mixes up the question of competence with the question of motivation and motivation and why Poilievre does what he does and in whose interest he works. That is what the Liberals need to get at. But sort of a checklist of safe, competent policies is not going to protect them. And I think that actually it's a bit that thinking that has led them down this path where they've been cornered into protecting the status quo, which the majority of Canadians feel is not serving them right now.
Yeah,
right,
but all of this is based on the premise that if they attack the Bank of Canada, there'll be political benefit.
And
I don't believe that's true.
They don't have to attack.
They don't have to attack. Like, I think that's way too binary an option. But, even when we have seen somebody attack the Bank of Canada, because I think you could argue at different points in this narrative, both the main opposition parties, or the one opposition party and the partner in government party, have been being critical, and I don't think they've been punished for that. I think they've been rewarded for it. It's particularly Poilievre. So, and I think it's all about the motive stuff that Jordan talked about. I think she's bang on the money there. But it's also appropriate for the government to set what the policy parameters are.
All right, I just think it's a caution to this group on this call, on this Zoom meeting, that you don't want to blow all your money and all your stuff and all your on 2023's top issue when you're heading toward an election in 2025. Jordan, you want to say something? I know
but they're not, right? Like the stuff that Jordan and I are talking about.
They're not doing anything.
Well, it doesn't cost them a penny to talk about some of these things in an empathetic way or look like they're pushing in that direction. Like, what's the cost of the grocery thing? It's zero. What's the cost of what we're talking about around interest rates in the Bank of Canada? It's zero. And in terms of the housing stuff, the 2% of the fund that they announced a year ago is now being spent. So they got 98% of that left that's already budgeted. I think some of these things are not costing. They're
David, I
signaling
think
intent.
To your earlier point about what are they going to do in this era of self-imposed austerity, right? Their options are limited on this, and I think that there's maybe a little too much of the bias towards caution, of the bias towards status quo thinking that is going to get them into trouble. And it's that thinking over a pattern of years that has led them to where they are today, which is what the actions that seem so minor now seem too radical 8 years ago, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and now they're in real trouble. So, well, I agree with you. We can't predict what the issue is going to be. We do know that it's likely going to do with people's pocketbooks, right? So that's a pretty safe bet. And I think that what the PMO needs to focus on now is a bias towards action on these things.
All right.
Well, how about this for a narrative? Which government is out of steam, out of ideas, and disconnected from the reality of your daily life? And which one is actually, leaning in the direction of, what the priorities are for you? I think that's a version of that is really what the Poilievre narrative is. And when you've got, 2/3, more than 2/3, 70%, what is the number right now in terms of people who want to change in government? It's in the 70s,
80s.
You know that 80s. So even more. So, that's what the issue is.
I agree with all that.
The others are proof points that that are used to demonstrate that case. But the overall narrative and the ballot question for Poilievre, I think, is as clear as it could possibly be. It's time for a change, and who's on your side versus who's on the side of the gatekeepers and the status quo.
Yeah, but I don't think David and I are advocating.
Because we got to move on. Go ahead.
Well, I'll go back to it. I think they need to play cards. I think they need to do things. I particularly think they need to persuade people that that they have a plan that's going to address the real needs of real people. And I don't think they've done that even with these measures. I don't think they've told their story, and I don't think they've given themselves an arc that allows them to reinforce and tell that story over and over and over again. So all of that, I don't think David or I are preaching inactivity. I'm just not convinced they'll be credible or capable of pulling off you know what? It's time. We're going to start kicking around the Bank of Canada. We're going to start telling what to do. We're going to change where the goalposts are on monetary policy. I just don't think I don't think that will be effective, and I don't think they'll be good at it. I would look for activity elsewhere.
Well, it's a lot at the moment, it feels like a lot of tactics without a strategy, Scott.
That's my core bitch.
Right. Okay. So quickly, we don't have a ton of time for this, but by God, it was a big piece. And we're talking about our clipping of the week and Shannon Proudfoot's profile of the historic Katie Telford, the longest serving chief of staff in modern Canadian politics. Massive article that by and large she should be happy with, I would think, and had the added benefit of telling me what my internal nickname was in the 2015 campaign, which I had not known. So here's an excerpt from the clipping. At this point, gotta check with Katie is basically a Parliament Hill magical incantation. She is the quiet voice that carries, the last person in the room, a first name only Ottawa main character. Some prime ministers have employed their chiefs of staff as mercenaries for specific moments and replaced them when the situation demanded something different. Others have held their chiefs close for years as trusted consiglieres. Katie Telford has outlasted them all. At first, this government presented itself very self-consciously as an ensemble cast. There was Justin and Jerry and Katie and Kate and Mike and Bill and Christy and Jody and Jane and all the rest, though the top of the marquee was always Mr. Trudeau, his principal secretary Gerald Butts, and Miss Telford. The years have peeled away almost the entire original gang. Some took more layers of skin with them than others. Now it's only Justin and Katie left. At this point, as the polls clobber the Liberals and they can't seem to shake a staggering inertia, Ms. Telford's longevity is evidence of the depth of Mr. Trudeau's reliance on her, not a sign that her clock is running down. At the very moment when it's crucial to get some fresh perspective, the same qualities that make Mr. Trudeau and Ms. Telford so valuable to each other, the comfort and constancy, the unwavering degree to which they have each other's backs, is precisely what might not be serving them well anymore. Scott, just as a little background for our listeners, can you tell us, how does a story like this come together?
Well, you got a reporter like Shannon Proudfoot. First of all, I should start by saying I love Shannon Proudfoot. I adore her writing. I lap it up the way a bear laps up honey. It's always delicious. It's always fun and sumptuous. I'm just a giant fan of hers. And she's a great reporter and a great person. It starts with somebody like Shannon Proudfoot, who people recognize instantly is not the kind of person who's looking to do a butcher job. She's going to uncover a narrative. It will be fair. It will be influenceable. So once she indicates she's writing it, then everybody has to make decisions. Do we participate or not? And how do we facilitate? Who talks, who doesn't, all that sort of stuff. So then Katie says, first thing is, I'm not going to talk. It looks inappropriate for me to participate in a profile about myself. Plus, I have, notwithstanding my confidence that Shannon's a fair person, no idea where this thing goes. It could end up concluding that I've outlived my best before date and I need to leave. And I don't want to be in a piece where I'm sort of having to effectively say, no, I'm still relevant. I still rock. Don't drive away. I'm still here. So I think that's smart. Then you sort of say, well, who do you license up? I know that they're going to talk to these number of people. They're going to ask for some folks who are around. They may or may not ask for people in the personal life. You decide who you want to license and who you don't want to license. You probably take somebody in the Prime Minister's office, if you're Katie, who's not you, to say, all right, you be the Sherpa for this piece. You headman it in terms of working with Shannon to figure out who gets facilitated. And then you sort of, and then it's out of your hands, man. And because you don't know who she's going to talk to, who's going to say awful things and all that kind of stuff. So, that's how it comes together. And, I would just say, like, I don't really know what to conclude from this piece other than they're 8 years into the government. You went into National Caucus with a bunch of people bitching and moaning that it was time to go. And, they usually shoot arrows at the staff before they point them directly at the king. And it's a pretty good piece. It's a pretty sound and fair piece. It went to great lengths to exhibit what people admired about her in 2015, what they've admired about her since. And it makes the consistent point of, interesting, eh? Like, she's outlasted and outwitted everyone else, and she's still there. And there's obviously some unique relationship between them. And so, like, this far in, that's not a bad piece. The fundamental question remains, is she going to remain in office until Trudeau leaves? And the answer is, yeah, she is. Like that. If that isn't going to turn out to be true, then we have no evidentiary basis to reach that conclusion. So it is what it is.
Jordan, what did you learn from this piece?
So I thought it was a really good piece, and I love Shannon Proudfoot's writing. So I was really happy when you picked this one. What did I learn? I think I learned that I was actually surprised at some of the tidbits about the degree of Katie's involvement in day-to-day things that would not be considered major, because of course that's spoken of frequently. But I think, the example that was given in the story about the PM being briefed for a call for a minister's senior staffer, and then the staffer being tipped out about the outcome, like that, it sounds bonkers to me, right? So I think for me, I was struck at just the concrete examples of that high degree of centralization. And I was also struck by the lack of mention about fatigue. And I think it's a factor that we've talked about a lot with respect to the team around Trudeau and this government. And it's really difficult to understate how exhausting it is to be in those roles for the length of time that they have been in those roles. And
I'm pretty beat down and tired, and all I do is talk about them. I don't have to do what they do.
Yeah. It's like living in the crucible, and I think that for me is maybe a factor that wasn't explored as much as it could be. And the other thing that I learned, or that underlined a thought that I and many others have already had, is that, well, Katie clearly brings very strong operational strengths to the office. That there is still a big gap there on broader strategy, on communications, on narrative that hasn't been filled. And so I think to that degree, the story really reinforced that narrative out there that the PMO has suffered since Butt's departure on that level. And I think that's borne out in their performance. And I would also echo, I think that the fact that coming out of that caucus retreat, and by the way, I'm still not as ready to give props for like basic caucus management as maybe you guys are, because if people came out of that retreat still griping, like that's really bad. So like the bar is that you come out, like that's basic competence, basic caucus management, that you come out with no public gripes. So I still don't think that extra cookies are to be awarded for that.
Well, it's not a Liberal caucus circa 2002. That is for sure. Sure.
Yeah. But is that the bar we want to use? So that's the question to ask, right? But yeah, I was struck at the fact that people are not coming for her publicly from inside the tent. And that is significant, because it is always, and certainly this is true within the NDP, this is true within every party, it is staffers' heads that are served up on platters first. And so the fact that even though she is such...
Yeah, you think Mulroney wanted to fire his best friend, Bernard Roy, as being principal secretary? No, he did it because he had to, because people are coming for him.
That's right. And so the fact that even though she's such a public figure, that has not happened yet, to me speaks to enduring capacity and the fact that people still see a strong value for her in the organization. And I also, based on this piece and others, I don't think she's going anywhere. So the question that I have coming out of it is, are the folks in the PMO, and obviously this would have to come from Katie, and, are they going to add something? Are they going to add someone to the bunker to hopefully crack open the windows a little bit, get some fresh air in there, because that is sorely needed. And so for me, that's the question I had coming out of it. But I thought it was a great piece.
Just on the setting up and journalism and stuff like that, and I heard what Jordan just said around not a lot of sharp criticism in the piece. I'm gonna point to that she's really lucky that it was Shannon Proudfoot that did this, who I think has kind of like a Walter Isaacson kind of approach to doing these kinds of stories. The two Globe journalists who have done those kinds of profile pieces of political folks over the years, she's by far the best of them. But if you're looking at like Radwanski, who I remember shepherding one of these things through on our friend Jenny, which was just rumors, innuendo, cheap shots, anonymous smears kind of bullshit. And Jane Tabor before Radwanski did a lot of these, and I think they were a lot more gossipy in their tone. And look, I probably like Jane more than you guys do, or maybe I do. I don't know. But like as a person, I think she's a fun person to go have a conversation with. But both would be more gossipy. I think Radwanski gossipy with like a sort of acidic tone. So I think she's lucky, and that it came across that way. I've heard the Jerry's the storyteller and the narrative guy. I'm not sure that he would describe it that way. I think it's more there were co-CEOs of Trudeau Land when he was around. And maybe, I guess I would say two heads are always better than one. And especially if Jerry Butts is one of those heads, because I think he's an incredibly smart person. That's not to take anything away from Katie. I think anyone who's been in that job as long as she has is obviously very skilled. But, in my experience, it's leadership team is better than leadership person, and organizations on the political side that have a leadership team. And I'll point to you guys, right? Like I think one of the great strengths of the Martin team was that it was a team. And there was a range of people who could keep in touch with their own networks of people who could pressure test ideas against each other to come up with stuff that's better. I think that's often the ingredient. It's less about, this person had this, area of specialty and this person had this area of specialty and everyone respected those lines. And, the media management for Paul Martin was good because Scott was there and he's really good at that. And the strategy was good because Herle's there. Yeah, like there may be an element of that, but I think the sum is always greater than the parts when it comes to political leadership teams. And maybe that's the larger point. And I think, we saw this with Harper. I've seen this with, many different leaders. I saw this sort of in the end days of Mike Harris too, where the leadership team gets smaller and smaller over time, and the amount of pressure testing and heads around the table decreases. And that's part of what creates that fatigue that Jordan was talking about. So I don't know. I wouldn't feel bad about that piece if I were Katie. I think it's it's fairly flattering as these things go. But if you're asking what do I think the core takeaway that I got from that is they're going through that same arc that I've seen in other places where it's fewer people around the table. I've got a lot of time for Ben Chin. I've worked with him on a number of files over the years, and I think he's a very smart guy. But I think it might be true, that earlier point about there was a marquee of people and there were a lot of people. Now there's fewer people, and that's maybe what's driving some of that sort of tired motif.
My complaint about there's the only couple times anybody ever tried to do a profile on me. My complaint wasn't the gossipy journalist or the acidic-minded editor. It was the inclination of the people writing to tell the truth and to report accurate anecdotes. That really was what sunk me. I'll say one more thing about this. I think one other reason I think Katie should be happy about this, and one thing I think it's interesting about the way the Trudeau guys have approached things from the word go is, and we're often critical. I'll put it on me. I'm often critical of the way that they will manage a media, the give and take around media and trying to frame a storyline and all that stuff. But they have always understood the importance of branding, and they've understood branding and marketing, and they've placed enormous emphasis on that. And then you look at this piece, I'll bet you the one thing that Katie really did, well, I'm going to try to control this, and I do care about this, is that she invested once again, when there's a public discussion about her, in that idea of being a data person. Like, it's, if you look at the things that people have written over the years, you always see the sort of same variations on the same stories about how she's so data driven, and she's clearly made a choice that is, right, how she wishes to be defined in the public arena as a professional practitioner. And I think, that comes through again. So she's got to be pleased with that. With all the smoke and fog of contemporary political jockeying, she gets that out again. And that, I think, is evidence of how laser focused they are on branding, even when it comes to themselves as opposed to the boss. And that being said, if I went into a room and someone began a meeting by saying, "What's your number?" to me, I would say 10.
My number is 9. My number is 9.
I would say 10 because that's what Guy Lafleur wore, and that's what Andre Dawson wore. And now, fuck off! I'm leaving this room. I am not
Number
having
minutes. I'm going to remain in this meeting.
Step back away from the line.
What is your number?
Well, I guess to wrap this up, I would just say that the story about the departure of Butts from this government and not being brought back and not being replaced is probably the biggest untold story about why this government is where it is and how it ended up here. So we'll await another journalist to uncover that story for us. All right, we're at that time. Gordon Pinsent, are you around, Mr. Pinsent?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay, who's going to start the Hey Yous? Jordan, go.
I got one. Yeah, you know I got one.
I know you do.
So my Hey You this week is going out to Heather Stephenson, Blaine Higgs, Doug Ford, and Danielle Smith, and any other politician of the center-right who feels like they have a strong desire to dabble in the far right, because this week there's going to be nationwide protests, anti-trans protests against LGBTQ inclusion in school curriculums, and all manner of things like that. And what I say to you is this. The people who are organizing these protests are associated with far-right conspiracy theorists, anti-COVID folks. These are people who are Christian nationalists, is a whole basket of folks that are not helpful for you. And there will be a strong temptation to double down on the awful policies that you have already announced that target children. And so I implore you, both from the perspective of it being the wrong policy that is harmful and is frankly just lazy politics, to step away from the issue, but also for your own good, that dallying with these people will come to no good ends for you. And to progressives, I would also say, it is so important this week to declare where progressives stand on this issue and to say that this will not be an issue that is going to be used as a political football, and that the right wants to talk about bathrooms and scaremongering and misinformation, but you need to be talking about making Canadians' lives more affordable. So make your position clear, but don't be sucked in. And that's my Hey You this week.
All right. Scott?
All right. Well, desk thump to Jordan. Mine will not top hers or compete with hers, and it's not as important. I'm going to go back to our discussion on housing, and I'm going to do something that's manifestly unfair. I'm going to play sliding doors, the beating of a butterfly's wings and how the time might have unfolded. It's inaccurate and unfair to suggest that one decision might have changed the way a whole massive complicated policy like housing unfolded. But with this weekend's decision to drop the GST on rental housing, you have to ask yourself, well, what's the story as to why that didn't occur 8 years ago? And the answer is and must be that despite the fact they ran on this idea and they'd pronounced themselves on this idea, once in office, the finance department officials got a hold of the finance minister, the newly minted Bill Morneau, who never met a creature of conventional wisdom that he didn't want to wrap his arms around and say yes, yes, yes. And they killed that idea. And they, must have, and then we heard this in bits and pieces and stories. Well, they argued at the time that there were alternatives that would be more effective. Well, actually not so fucking much, as it turns out. And I know that it's probably blatantly untrue that if we had had that measure in place 8 years ago, that the world would be completely different now, but it'd be a bit different, right? There would have been a greater financial incentive for builders to keep building rental housing. There would have been a less of a focus on let's pre-sell every fucking condo on earth that we can and overbuild on condos and then make certain that we attract all that foreign investment. And then, it takes us further and further away from housing for people and more for investments. I think it would have perverted the market. It would have allowed a lot less perversity in the marketplace that we're trying to clean up now. So my hey yous to Bill Morneau and the finance department of 8 years ago, you guys shit the bed.
Mic drop.
Yes. Go. Well, those nepo baby who inherit their dad's company tend to be very in favor of conventional wisdom. So I'm not shocked at that.
Here.
My hey you.
Yeah, but when Jerry put him there, Jerry knew he could move him around. It was only
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's probably some of that. My hey you is going to go to Manitoba to Premier Heather Stefanson. We didn't quite get around to chatting about it this week, but I think it's going to be a really interesting, really close race there. And I think affordability is a big issue in Manitoba too, and trying to find things to talk about there. So my hey you to Heather Stefanson would be, you might want to get in on some of the action that Doug Ford and Premier Eby have had around what we were talking about earlier around interest rates. I think there's some cover for other people who are having that conversation, and I think it's a good one, and I think it's the kind of thing that would be helpful for your campaign. So my hey you is hey Heather, hop in on that issue. I think the water's quite warm.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. Listen, my hey you goes out to Mark Carney, and it's like, hey man, jump in, like do it. Like you got opinions about this stuff. You're now going public. You're giving interviews. You're giving speeches. Jump in and help out. There's no doubt you can help, and you've got to develop some skills in this game too. Like this thing last weekend. Make that the last one of those. Nobody needs to find out anymore that you can convince Tony Blair or somebody else of a progressive world leader of your point of view. We need to find out if you can convince people in Peel of your point of view. And so get in the game, get in the business, make a difference. And this is the moment. The government needs ideas and new energy. You've got it. Bring it. Let's have it.
Hundo P. Canada needs Carney.
All right, that's our show for this week. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor TELUS and our sponsor CN Rail. I'd like to thank the three of you for being here. It was a lot of fun, raucous meeting this week, and everybody who watched or listened. We'll be back next week with more of the Curse of Politics. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. See you then.